you have suggested in many interviews and many, we've heard you say that people are misunderstanding you, misinterpret what you say, pull it out of context. We always hear you correcting something that's been said. Well, I didn't say that. Um, is this a frustration for you? Why do you think this happens? Um,
Well, there is in the dominant society
mm,
a fear of any black person who commands respect and influence over large numbers of black persons, and they, meaning the dominant community, do not have control, even in a measure, over that individual. And because of fear, they see this person as a threat. And as a result of that fear, they sometimes and oftentimes intentionally misquote the person whom they fear so that they can create fear in the hearts of the target audience of that person and distrust in the target audience of that person, so that perhaps out of the target audience of that person there might come sufficient opposition to that person to destroy the aim and purpose of that person whom they fear. And so, as it is in the life of the prophets and messengers of God and those who fight for the liberation of an oppressed people, they always have to make clear their own aim and purpose, because the government into which they come and the people among whom they appear are the target of vicious propaganda against that person. So that person has to correct the lies and the distortions so that the people might see that person as he or she really is. And so I'm just one in a long line of persons that have been misquoted and an evil veil thrown over good people so that their own people might disown them, reject them, despise them, and ultimately stand idly by while the government or others assassinate their character or even assassinate them.
does it bother you?
No, it goes with the job. You know, you cannot accept any gift that God gives you that doesn't have an accompanying responsibility. And if I were in music, as I was, or in athletics, as I was, I cannot accept that gift without accepting the sacrifice that is necessary to perfect that gift, that it might serve uh, the audience and serve the person who has been given the gift. So my gift is speech. That is my greatest gift. A spiritual light that gives me understanding, a quick understanding of the divine Word of God. And as I articulate that word and it frees an oppressed people, then I become a target. And part of that goes with advancing the Word of God. And if we study the history of the prophets and sages and teachers, they have always suffered bitter opposition, but that only proves first the commitment of the individual to the message that he brings. Second, it proves if God is with that individual, then nothing of the opposition is able to uproot that individual or those who believe in and follow him. So it's all part of it, the job.
But never even, I think you mentioned actors or singers. I think the greatest singers in the world, sometimes the criticism can hurt. And I think even the prophets had, moments of, how did they, they
Oh,
got
of
this
course,
wrong.
of course.
Can you call,
We read what our critics write. We at first are very hurt by what they write, but after a while, like anything, if I were a boxer, in the gym, you get hit, and you get hit so that you can withstand the punishment that your opponent is going to give you while you deal out your own. So whoever can withstand the greatest is becomes the victor.
Wasn't this something that develops over time?
Yes, that's right.
Can you talk about any turning point when you learned to see that this is really...
Oh, sure. As a young minister in the mosque, there was always a question and answer session where the people in the audience would challenge you on what you said. And I would notice, of course, my heart palpitating with fear and apprehension as to whether or not I would be able to handle the the question. Sometimes the questioner was hostile, and sometimes they were just seeking information. And luckily for me, I was confined at that time to the mosque.
Where was this now?
In Boston.
In Boston.
And then at a certain point, I came out of the mosque to do radio talk shows where people would call in and attack your point of view. And I would have trepidation, discomfort. And then even inside the mosque, when believers who in my own inadequacy and in their desperately trying to tolerate me in my inadequacy would challenge me with criticisms. And I didn't take criticism so well in the early days of my ministry.
About what year are we talking about? What
We're
period?
talking about 56, 57, 58, 59, 60. But I had to grow to understand that criticism is not always an enemy. And today, and this is very true, I listen to my critics and I study their criticisms of me. And in some instances, I learned to have greater respect for these men and women because they sincerely believe that I am this or I am that. And so I try to study the criticisms to see myself from their eyes and look at myself through their eyes and see, am I that person? And if I am, then they will help me to purify.
Can you cite a specific example of this? And an instance where a criticism really helped you grow? You learned from
All criticism helps me to grow. Some of it is just vicious and malicious. And when I sense that the person is vicious and malicious, well, I take the criticism, but I see the motive of the critic. I have a wonderful critic in Brother Haki Madhubuti, in Brother Salim Muwakil, even in Clarence Page,
Mhm.
even in Carl Rowan,
Mhm.
you know.
Can you say something that either one? I know Hakeem Abudi, Clarence Page, and Carl Rowan. I don't know the other gentleman who you mentioned, but can you
Well,
give me one?
Haki
Mm-hmm.
raised
Mm-hmm.
questions
Mm-hmm.
that that question my character.
Mm-hmm.
Can he really be trusted, or
Mm-hmm.
does he have some ulterior motives
Mm-hmm.
in what he's saying and doing that is vain or personal
Mm-hmm.
rather than in the best interest of the masses of our people?
Was this in reference to something specific, some specific incident?
I don't think it's
No.
in
Mm-hmm.
reference to a specific incident, but the point is that some of those close around me, when we had our convention
Mm-hmm.
in Africa, we invited Haki
Mm-hmm.
to come
When was this?
in 1994,
Mm-hmm.
and some of those close to me did not want him to come because
Mm-hmm.
he had written something critical
Mm-hmm.
of me, and I said, and that's all the more reason why I want him to come,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt that he did not know me as well as he could,
Mm-hmm.
because we had not communicated
Mm-hmm.
for years.
Mm-hmm.
And we had dinner in Ghana, and I told him that I loved him even more,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew that as long as there were men like Haki
Mm-hmm.
who would critically appraise me and my work from an honest perspective,
Mm-hmm.
that I would always be able to correct myself should I be off course.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the value of
Mm-hmm.
critical analysis
Mm-hmm.
coming from persons who are sincere.
Mm-hmm.
And Haki is one of the more committed and sincere
Mm-hmm.
men that we have among us.
Do you ever feel there is a danger in going off course for you? Are
Oh,
you?
of
Yeah.
course.
Uh-huh.
There always
Mm-hmm.
is a danger whenever you are praised by many
Mm-hmm.
and loved by many.
Mm-hmm.
There is the tendency to become arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
There is the tendency to begin to think more of yourself than you
Mm-hmm.
should.
Mm-hmm.
And so one always
Mm-hmm.
has to be pricked with the thorns of one's own shortcomings,
Mm-hmm.
that we do not wish for people to worship us because we are but a passing thing,
Mm-hmm.
and we are not God, and we are far from perfect. So we want to point the people to the perfect being,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily to ourselves. But those kinds of spiritual safety nets, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
comes with time.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen yourself arrogant?
Oh, yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
I remember once, during the time of the fall of the Nation of Islam,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in
We're talking about now.
a
We're talking 70s.
1976,
Uh-huh.
75,
Mm-hmm.
76,
Mm-hmm.
77, before I thought to rebuild the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I happened to be in my home here in Chicago, and my son was playing one of my tapes from an earlier speech in the mosque when I was the minister in New York. And as I heard my words, I shouted up to my son, and to be very honest, I said, "Turn that nigger off. He's just too damn arrogant."
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, one does not see oneself.
Mm-hmm.
It says the eye beholds everything
Mm-hmm.
except itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometime during that period,
Mm-hmm.
when Elijah Muhammad was not here,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not in this great position that I was in New York, and I was down.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, God allowed me to see myself and to learn the value of humility.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
And when I heard myself and saw myself,
Mhm.
I knew then that part of my preaching was for God and part of it was vanity.
Mhm.
And either I was going to be all for God
Mhm.
or all for vanity.
Mhm.
And one has to purify oneself from these kinds of traits or characteristics in order to really be effective in transforming human life.
Mhm.
And your own life
Mhm.
has to be the example of that. And one can't do that if we are not brutally honest
Mhm.
with ourselves.
Mhm. This period that you're talking about, you said it was, you were listening, it was around in the 70s when the Nation of Islam was falling apart, and you were listening to this speech that you made that was around the same period.
No,
No, it was a
it was
speech.
earlier when
Okay.
Elijah Muhammad was here
Oh, I
and the
see.
nation was in full bloom,
Okay.
and I
You were
was the
aware of that time.
premier minister
Oh,
in New York
okay.
and,
Okay.
you know,
Uh-huh.
and commanded tens of
I
thousands of
see.
people,
Uh-huh.
but I didn't see myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you feel do you see arrogance now?
No,
Do you ever? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
no.
Mm-hmm.
I see the passion
Mm-hmm.
for the truth,
Mm-hmm.
and I see the passion for the liberation of our people.
Mm-hmm.
But I know my
Mm-hmm.
own
Mm-hmm.
limitations,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that it is not I, but it is God,
Mm-hmm.
and I must lean on Him and trust in Him
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
completely surrender to Him in order to get through
Mm-hmm.
the difficulty that the word that I
Mm-hmm.
speak
Mm-hmm.
has put me in.
Mm-hmm.